All right, welcome back. If you have been here before, if you're not, welcome aboard. I embarked on this journey to explore all things M365, Microsoft Loop, or MS Loop, or just Loop. And I am particularly excited about this product because it's one of the newer additions to the M365 space, fairly new. I mean, it's almost 3 years old now, but 3 years ago it was a baby. Now it's a somewhat mature product that has a whole lot to offer. In an earlier session, I explored how we encounter loop, whether you are aware of it or not. One of the places where I demonstrated that is in Teams. If you create a new post in your chat, you will see this little icon here that says loop components. And that's how you insert a loop component into a team chat. And we also looked at this here. When you click on it, what happens? It will open in the browser as it promises, and that will take us to the Microsoft Loop. Here I just got the title that was given there, and I can go and say some text in loop. If you are sharing this with someone through a DM, you have to post it before they can actually edit or do something meaningful with it. However, from that point onwards, the moment you added this component into MS Teams, the chat will be stored in that central repository, which we called SPE or SharePoint Embedded. And from there onwards, you can collaborate on it with anyone you decide to share it with. At this point, everybody within this team has access to it by default. We'll discuss permissioning and sharing and all the different modalities of that at length in subsequent sessions. So that is one avenue to create loop components. And the second one was Outlook, the good old Outlook. And in here, as soon as you click inside the body of a message, you will see loop component. The logo here essentially is the same colorful loop that you see when you go into the full-blown product. If you click on this, slightly different experience in Outlook than it is in Teams. You've got several options. The default behavior is that the loop component will be embedded, as you've seen here, or you can send a link that upon clicking will take the recipient of this message to the loop component within MS Loop through the browser, and they can modify it there. If I say open it in web, you expect again it would take me to the proper Microsoft Loop. And as you can see here, it just did that. And if I were to type something here, this is loop. So you get the point. It's in a central location, and irrespective of where it started its life, it is going to be there with all good stuff that we discussed, like version control and so on and so forth. All the edits that occur on that particular page will be reflected here. And if you decide, I don't like this last change I made, you can easily revert to an earlier edition. Loop, good feller. Copilot is going to go talk to the intelligence behind the scenes and bring us some results. These days, everybody's doing this, which is great. I am from the academic background, and we appreciate citations and giving credit when it's due. And I'll be doing a lot of that. I give credit to this team and many other teams within Microsoft who have been creating these good stuff for us over the years. Editing pages is how we go and edit this particular content that was just generated. You can delete it. You can also copy that response and store it in MS Word or OneNote or whatever tool you use, or Loop if you like. But for Loop, it's already done for us here. As you can see on the left-hand side, it's already added to the pages, although it says conversation here. It's initially added to the conversations. But as soon as I go edit in pages, and if I close those conversations and back here, it's not quite there yet. You have to refresh the page sometimes more than once. No instant gratification in the wider SharePoint universe. Things take their time, but they do happen. And with a little patience, you will get to appreciate what I am trying to demonstrate here. So that is what we discussed last time, the 3 touch points where we can create, or the 3 instigation points. That is pages within Copilot, Outlook through a message. If I were to send this to someone, for example, let's say I send it to myself, right here, I've got multiple identities for testing. Send. You expect it will be in my sent items, obviously, but after a few seconds, you see it popped up and it says, hey, you've got a message called testing loop from yourself. Voila. You can see that that object is still embedded in here, or content, and you will see that more content is instantaneously visible as you would expect, right? So that is sort of the ground we covered last time. Picking up from where we left off, a few things that you can do on the page. We talked about it, and you probably noticed that I've been using page and component interchangeably. They are not identical, but at this level, let's say that if I say page component, they are synonymous for the purpose of just this session. You will understand the intricacies and the differences between one and the other down the road. But we looked at version history, we said modify the content here and so on. But one notable absence here is you don't see the delete option, because this particular one is embedded in an email message that started its life in my Outlook client when I first created that. So that is one distinction from what you have here in the pages. Rather, when we created the page and Copilot, and we went ahead and edited it here. If I were to go back, let me click on this. If I were to select this, you see you have the option to delete, right? That is one first distinction between component that you inserted in MS Teams or in an Outlook message, or you received it if you are the recipient. There is no option to delete. That essentially a page, a component, they start their lives in Outlook, in Teams, in Copilot, and there could be OneNote and others as well. But ultimately, the central repo for that is SPE. You can tweak it, edit it, add to it, and don't forget the big key set of components that we have here is /. You do that and you have a whole bunch of stuff that you can do. You can even record a video in here. This is one of the newer things that have been added. Each one of these could be a local component, or it could be linking to an external product. Calendar being in Exchange, and progress tracker, task list. These are hosted in Planner, Kanban board as well. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can insert. There's a whole lot that you can do within a page of a Microsoft Loop, and we'll be covering those at length. What we've seen is through a Copilot. When you talk to the chatbot and it produces some results, it can store those for you in a page, and that page can be further edited here, and that will be reflected in the portal as well. These are pages that I created earlier on for this and other sessions, and the list can grow. You can click on this to see all the pages that have been created, and they are chronological with timestamps. This was 3 minutes ago, as you can see, is the one that we've been working with. So that is at a very high level how Loop is utilized across multiple products within the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And things are only going to get better from here, right? So let's step back and look at the product itself. It comes in 2 flavors. There is the obvious, which we have been exploring so far, which is an app that you can add and pin or unpin in the M365 Copilot. If you click on this, it's going to take you to the landing page of Loop. And this one here used to be loop.microsoft.com. Workspaces are just that, workspaces. And as you would expect, workspaces contain pages. Pages can be shared as components. Pages also can host components. That's really in a nutshell. What is all this excitement I exude about using Microsoft Loop and advocating for it? Hopefully that will become clearer as we spend a bit more time exploring this. Let me step back a little bit and talk about OneNote because a lot of us have used OneNote for a long time. And if you are an avid OneNote user like I am, I started using it in 2003 when they first released it. I still love it, but since I encountered Loop from its early days, I grabbed onto it and never looked back. I'm going to hopefully share the details of why I'm so excited about it with you. Maybe some of that excitement will rub on you and you'll adopt it and even disseminate it in your own organization and promote it. I don't get paid by Microsoft or by the Loop team. I just love the technology and I'm passionate about it. Full disclosure, I worked with the SharePoint embedded team for a bit and I'm proud of that contribution. And I love the platform. I have been around it since its early days, 2002, when started consulting with the 2003 edition. So we've come a long way. I'll be sharing some stories from the trenches if you care. But back to OneNote. Why I'm bringing OneNote up is if you are a OneNote user, then it is not big departure for you to start using Loop. Because in OneNote, we had this concept of notebook. So if I were to call this Loop Notebook, you would create a notebook that would, in the old days, be stored in your file system. It would literally create a file that is stored in your file system. These days, it's a bit more complicated than that, but that is essentially what we did in the old days. So you create a new notebook, and then that notebook would have within it what we used to call sections. So you can see here, this is my Loop notebook, and then you would have a section, and I'm going to call this lecture 2 and say, okay, you would see that it created section for me in there. And then within this section, you could add pages. So in here, you can see I already have an untitled page. And Loop, I don't know if you noticed a couple of times I changed the title of the page. That changed the name of the page. The reason I'm spending a bit of time here is to create that migration path for you, if you like, if you are a OneNote user. One thing that I still use OneNote for is the dictation. Again, just like Outlook, this is an old product that has come over a long history, and there are a lot of products and add-ins that were created for it, but Loop is promising to head in that direction as well. So here, if I were to call this page 1, you can see I picked up that title, and here I can go ahead and perhaps insert a table and so on. But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is when I wanted to create a table, I had to go to some toolbar or menus, insert, and so on. That is how we did things in the old days. In Loop, one big departure from that, you probably noticed, and I called it the key, is the forward slash. So here I can slash all I want. All I'm going to get is just that slash, right? I mean, this had its own beauty as well. I could go test and then test 2. And if I were to just tab that, I get a table. I miss that when I use Loop. So a lot of times I find myself coming back, old habits die hard, to OneNote. But you can also insert a Loop component into OneNote. OneNote is powerful, it's beautiful, and I can't say enough good things about it. But Loop is the new sexy, wonderful M365 integrated cloud native product. Back to the comparison. You will see here we have a notebook, we have sections, we have pages. In Loop, the equivalent of a notebook is a workspace. And a workspace is a site collection. That is essentially a site collection that's created within SPE dedicated to that workspace. For those who are in a corporate world, government, whatever. You don't have your own tenant. If you have the luxury of creating workspaces, you should think a little bit about organizing your content into a small number of workspaces as you can, because this will lead to proliferation of site collections. Just in the case of SharePoint and Teams and so on, we highly recommend that you don't go create a channel on a whim, because that creates a SharePoint site underneath it as well. It adds up really fast with the pricing models changing and storage becoming premium. Be considerate of that. Go ahead and create workspaces to organize your stuff into ideas or Canvas courses. I develop a lot of courses. Canvas is one of those learning management systems that we use at Simon Fraser University, where I work. I do AI research and development on the side. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can organize into a workspace. I still use my old notebook, SharePoint embedded, by the way, in order to scribble notes and think of your workspace as your notebook, right? And if you're a bit organized, you probably have those little markers that we put in there to break it into sections, right? So a notebook here then is comparable to a workspace. How do you create a new workspace? Right here. You just click new workspace. The menus are changing quite a bit for the better. If you are in a larger organization, you probably have sensitivity labels and other DLP policies that are applied at the tenant level. If you had things like confidential or secret or top secret, etc., and you are creating a workspace to collaborate with a small group of people, say you're working on an R&D project or whatever it might be that is of sensitive nature, or you are in the HR department and you have a file on recruiting a new high-level executive, you could potentially apply sensitivity labels that are provided by your organization. But everything is secure by default here, and we'll explore how you can further tweak the permissioning and the sharing. It looks very similar to your MS Teams, OneDrive, and SharePoint experience, because as I mentioned, this is based on SPE. I can only share it with people from within my organization. As soon as I create the workspace, I can immediately make it available to collaborators. Of course, you can add more later on. Let me call this lecture 2 workspace, and no sensitivity label. I am going to add myself, my other identity, that is, just for testing. And then I can immediately go in here and add content. We didn't have it a short while ago. As you can see here, you can start with a workspace that's hydrated by content from earlier workspaces or pages that were created through Copilot, Teams, or Outlook. And here you can see I've got a bunch of lectures that I created in the past. For example, I can go ahead and select this and that, or I can select everything by simply clicking that. I can add a nice description here. Demo purposes, I can add emojis. That is something you can do here as well. I don't use a lot of emojis in Loop personally. Something went wrong there. I couldn't load it, probably permissions issue, or it just couldn't render because it's still working on it, right? You know, that hypnotizing working on it loop that we get. As you can see here, it says connected. And in the bottom there, under recent, you will see that workspace. So there are 2 places where you see it. If you click on the emoji there, it will reveal the full name, or you can also see it under recent. When I click on this, what is going to happen is it slides out a new column. The one on the left here is for the global environment, for the entire application. You can see workspaces. I've got meeting notes, etc. These are just different types of components. And here you will see the recent things that I interacted. right? This is specifically for workspaces. And as you can see here, we've got the workspaces column, which shows all the workspaces that I've got in this particular instance of Loop. And that is what you see when you click on this one here, or you type the top URL there and you come back to what I call the landing page. That is the equivalent of a landing page for a website, essentially. All right, so recap. When we get to loop.cloud.microsoft, or however you arrive at it, if you have already bookmarked it now, or you have the old bookmark loop.microsoft, that is all going to lead you to the same spot. On the left-hand side here, we've got the navigation bar. We've got recent here, which is specific to workspaces. We've got recent here, which is all the pages that you clicked on over the last little while. And as you can see here, they're time-stamped and they'll tell you when they are modified. Back to workspaces, if I were to go into the one we just created called Lecture 2 Workspace, you will see that there is by default a single page called Untitled. And if I click on that, and you already know now from our earlier conversation or from the notebook comparison that I just created, the page gets its title from the page title, or the page name here will be the same as the page title here. So if I were to call this page 0 and lecture 2, then it takes a few seconds and we'll see that it's reflected over here. A question that may arise immediately is, okay, so we created this new workspace and we added a page here, but where are all these pages that we have been creating either through Copilot or MS Teams or Outlook, as you have seen me do earlier when we plugged in a component that came through? And here, as you can see, this was from Copilot, a page that was created there. And this is another one that we created in the earlier session. If you have seen it, if not, you can find it and benefit from some of the things I've been talking about in there and so on. So all these items can be found in recent, but as I said several times, recent is just that, only a bunch of recent items. So what happens to these pages? The pages that were created in Loop, in Copilot, within Loop, they are pushed into workspaces. So pages on the MS Copilot, M365 Copilot here that were created when we interacted with the chat bot, they all go into my workspaces. Actually, before we do that, going back to recent here. So what about those components that were created either through MS Teams or Outlook, such as this one? It says created in Outlook email. And that is the one I created in here and sent to myself. Now, if you notice, when I go to my workspace, you don't see it here. So the components that were created in Teams or Outlook, they don't appear in your workspace because they sit in the OneDrive of the originator, the one that created them and shared them with you. Or if you were the creator, then they will be sitting in your OneDrive as well. So how do we put it in one of these workspaces? And that's really a very important step to further cement or solidify that content within your organized environment. And the way we do that is by going to that page, to the component rather, let's say loop paragraph that was created in MS Teams, or the one that clearly states that it was created in Outlook. It says add to workspace. So first I click on that component, it will open the page for me, and clicking on this, it gives me the option to add it to a particular workspace. Now, Over time, this My Workspace could turn into your dumping ground that will just grow sort of like the documents folder on your desktop. Be aware of that. It's a fine line between workspace prolification, which tends to consume a bit more space than just the pages and so on. As you can see here, I only used this particular tenant for encounters such as this lecture. On the technical side here, very simply, you pick a workspace that you want to add this page into. For the purpose of this discussion, I'm just going to add it to my workspace here. And if I go to my workspace, voila, you get the page that I just added in here. What you will notice is there's this little icon to represent a hyperlink. If you compare these two here, you'll see this one has the hyperlink icon, which means whatever changes you make in the original is going to be reflected here as well. So that is just something to keep in mind. Of course, original being the one that is in the instigators folders in OneDrive or in Teams. And we'll get back to Teams because this, once you get a good grasp on what workspaces are, I'll show you how you can create a workspace for Team channel as well. That's a new feature that has been introduced fairly recently as well. And I'm very keen on that one because I've been anticipating it and complaining about not having it for a long time, right? So, recap. Workspaces then can be created here via a new workspace, or you can go to Loop, the home page that is, and out here you will see that all the workspaces are in this location, and from there you can create a new workspace. Now, you probably noticed that while I was in a particular workspace, in this case lecture 2 workspace, I had one more option there. Because I'm on the landing page, the only option available to me is to create a new workspace. But if I were to go back in here and click the exact same button, you will see I've got a few more options. I can add a link, just as you saw there when I added a document from the Outlook into, or the one that originated in Outlook, I added it into a workspace. I saw the link in there, right? So that's what link is. You can simply go like this and give it a name and add a link. If you have used SharePoint for a while, you're probably familiar with this, where we can add links to a document library rather than uploading the document itself. Here it says upload a document. That's another thing we can do. You can add any Office documents, things that you can render in Office essentially. And it will do the same thing. This document was uploaded, but what is going to happen is it's going to push it into your OneDrive and add a link to it, just like it did with the page or the component that was created within Outlook or Teams. And how do I know that? You can see there's a little link here, the icon that shows the hyperlink icon that is recognized probably universally. And in here, we have a bunch of options. Again, we'll explore those as we progress, but I just wanted to show you that you can actually upload a document into OneDrive and link it here as well. Again, this is one of those very recent features. If you were checking out some older videos on YouTube, you will probably not see these options. Right, back again to create. So we can create a link, we can upload a file. You already seen how we can create a new workspace. What about a page? We simply go like that and create a new page, untitled again. And there are a few things that you can do in the page. Real quick run through what we can do here. In the very bottom here, you can see this is a growing list of templates. So instead of starting from a blank page, which is the default, you can start from a template that's pre-populated with a bunch of features that Microsoft has prepared for us. So you can start with a project brief, for example, which will have a bunch of very nice cover up there, basically a sort of a generic project template layout. Click on the next one. I haven't modified anything in there. I can simply overwrite the initial template. This one is for team decisions. This one is for project planning. As you can see, it plugs in a few suggested starting points, tables, and so on, meeting notes, etc. So that is a quick start for templates. And there's a whole bunch more in here. As you can see, when I click that template gallery in the bottom here, you will see that there is a whole bunch to choose from. A growing one, you can see Scrum board, you've got a hack project, you've got MVP, and so on for the different purposes or use cases, if you like to. I'll give you just a quick start, help you. If I say use this one, for example, the MVP, and I've got, this is for products, not MVP as in the valuable player or professional. You can start with a product name, objectives, product scope, etc. You can start with your project planning right like that, right? Within minutes, you can get a head start on those who are probably trying to create it from scratch, right? So that is how we add a page. We can give it a title. You can update the cover. Obviously, you can see the title, the emoji, the cover all came from the template, but you can further tweak that inclined. As I said, I'm not a visual designer, so I don't spend a lot of time on that aspect of things, but definitely this is a quick way to get started. We also have this, one of those newer features that were added, the recycle bin, which is definitely a very welcome addition to our loop. Recap then. Workspaces. You create a workspace. You add a page. That page could be started from a template, or you could start from scratch. If you were to start from scratch, like I did with this one here, remember the key. You go like that, and that's the forward slash. You can add a table. You can work through the table just like you would in MS Word. Header 1, for example, or am I typing? This one is header 2, etc. You can add values in here. You can tag people. You can add references to pages from within your workspace or beyond documents. Like, for example, this is the document I uploaded into my OneDrive. I can simply add a link to it here. If I click on it, it will take me to that document and open it in a new tab. So it is really just beautiful in one place using keyboard shortcuts or the combination with the mouse as well. You can see here I can scroll down. I'm using the mouse wheel in this case. You can also use the cursor. Right now I'm using the arrows up and down in order to navigate. Some of us old folk prefer to use keyboards naturally, but this supports both. If I were to scroll up and down again using the touch screen, you will notice that it does take care of the scrolling aspect of it as well, right? So that is pages at a very high level. Now let's step back a little bit again and look at the big picture. Workspaces. Workspaces contain pages. What are components then? Components are a means to package and share elements within the page or an entire page, right? Let me show you that. At the very top here, there is this little icon that says copy as loop component. So if I were to click on that, that is going to copy this whole thing, the page that is, as a loop component. Furthermore, you can add permissions to it. So by default, it's going to be everyone within your organization. But if you wanted to narrow down who has access to it and what level of access, you can specify that here. So I can say only people I choose, and I'm going to only add Alex and Adele. And I'm gonna say, you can also put a time limit on it, an expiry date. That's for the share. So that component is a very rich package that has not only the details of the page itself, i.e. a link to the original page in SPE and so on and so forth, but it also has details such as the expiry date, the permissions, who has access to it. All that stuff is bundled in that package, which we call a component. So hopefully now the distinction between a page and a component is clear to you, because when we went into Outlook and MS Teams, we inserted components. But when we got into Loop, the only way we could look at those components, modify them, tweak them was within a page. So that's almost a one-to-one correspondence between a page and a component in MS Teams or Outlook is almost one-to-one to a page upon creation. You can further tweak it after it is being created, and it could be a bit more complex, but that is the one scenario where page equals component. And that's why I was using those terms interchangeably. I pointed that out earlier in the session. If I say apply here, that's going to create that component and it automatically copies it to the clipboard. You can see here it says link copied and it shows these two heads, which means there are specific people which I chose to share this component or to give this component access to. I can go back to MS Teams and share it with someone. I can start a chat here and maybe DM somebody. I'll go, hey, Alex, I just created a component. Check this out, right? So you can put it in a DM or you can put it in a group chat in a channel and voila, you can see that it automatically rendered that web page that I create or loop page that I created and bundled as a component and I brought it and rendered it within MS Teams. So there are a few things that or terms and vernacular that will be thrown around and when you start working with loop, that is component again, page, and as you can see, those are almost one-to-one correlation when it comes to dealing with Teams and Outlook and working with loop in that context, right? So hopefully that clarifies that. And in here, I can simply say done with it and share it. What is going to happen is it's already added in this thread, and Alex from here onward can contribute and modify things and so on. And whatever we do in the Teams client here, as we are chatting, we can collaborate on it. It will be reflected in Loop as well. So here in Teams with Alex, and if I go back into the page itself, you can see that it was indeed reflected in Loop, right? So hopefully that clarifies that distinction between what is a page and what is a component. You can see what I did there. I took a component that I created of this page and I inserted it in a page. What does that mean? Let me go back here to this MVP page we created a few minutes ago, and I'm going to go ahead and say, hey, I want to insert this one here, right? You saw the difference there. I inserted a component within the page that the component contains, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense anyways. But if I go and insert it in another page, you will see that there are a few things that you have to consider. Things like it says, hey, this one is shared with specific people. You want to make sure that you open it up, right? Because the permissions on this page are different from the permissions that I specified. It was granular where I said only the people I selected, and here it says no, this page doesn't have the same restrictions. By default, the page is accessible by all people within the workspace, but if you bring in a component, that component could be a loop component, just like you saw me create off of that other page, or it could be something else. And a page is gonna respect the permissions that are assigned at this source. And that's the beauty of this whole M365 space, because it is controlled by a single permission model that carries over between, at least in the SharePoint hosted space, right? OneDrive, MS Teams, and Loop, which is sitting on top of a version of SharePoint that we call SharePoint Embedded. Or you can simply display it as a link. So if I say no insert and share, what is going to happen is it's going to plug that whole other page and it renders it. It's not going to copy the content. The content still remains in the source, You can actually work on it here inside MVP. For instance, if I go back to the source, you will see that it is indeed reflected as one would expect, right? So hopefully that shows you the power of Pages components and how they can be utilized to work collaboratively on creating some really fantastic material, all organized in workspaces. As we discussed, all this stuff is right now in my workspace that I created a few minutes ago or in the course of this discussion, and I already have 2 pages within it. Over the next little while, we'll be discussing how to further organize your content into what resembles sections in OneNote and create hierarchies and so on. And then we will move on to things like personas and use cases. As you can see, we already have templates for pages where you get a starting point purpose built for a specific scenario. We will consider how you can organize those into workspaces and so on. We'll discuss some of the best practices as well. I'm talking about best practices here and there across the entire course. I'm not going to dedicate a full session for that unless there's a particular need, which I don't foresee right at this moment. All right. Well, thank you for being here with me and keep watching. A few more to come.